Hi, I'm Lauren. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Kendra and Rachel and the Anchorage Museum for hosting this show and event. So I was born and raised, can everyone hear me too? Okay, great. I was born and raised here in Anchorage, but I got to spend my summers at my grandparents' remote homestead on the shores of Lake Clark in southwest Alaska. And you can only get there by bush plane, so it's incredibly remote. And growing up out there, I got to see a lot of animals pass by, bears and moose and all sorts of birds. And spending the summer with my grandmother, she loved animals, and she always had a pack of rescue dogs at her feet, but she also really had a lot of respect for the wildlife out there. And she'd also always take care of the birds that hit the window, try to nurse them back, taught us kind of to stay at a respectful distance from the larger critters, and really shaped a lot of who I am today. And every summer she would read us, my brother and I, the book Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl. And if you're not familiar with the story, it's about a bunch of animals, some foxes and badgers and rabbits, underground critters that are trying to kind of live and survive despite some awful farmers. And these animals are anthropomorphized, and it was kind of one of many children's books that kind of helped teach me how to be empathetic towards animals. I really related to the animals in the book as opposed to the humans in it. And being out at the cabin, there was a lot of time where I had to kind of amuse myself, and because my grandma would be working in the garden, and I found myself reading a lot and drawing a lot, but also I would read a story about an animal, and then I'd be that animal. I'd run around in the yard. One time I read Black Beauty, so then I was pulling around the wood cart, like pretending to be a horse. And so it was kind of a time where I could just be whatever I wanted to be, and I was really free. So when I go back into the ceramic studio and sculpt animals as an adult, there's part of me that's trying to reach back in time to grab that moment in which I felt so free and unencumbered by everything that adulthood brings. I'm also drawn to animals because their anatomy, I think, is very beautiful. Different animals can be very dynamic. And I'm particularly have been drawn to bears these last few years for multiple reasons. When I was a kid, I remember my grandfather talking about skinning out bears. He was a big game guide, and he would talk about how when you peel back the skin, they look like people underneath there. When I was a teenager, I saw my brother and cousin skin out a bear, and I was shocked by how much it looked like a person underneath there, especially in the shoulders and arms. And so I kind of think of bears as being these people underneath all that fur. And they're very strong and beautiful and brutal, yet they can be very fragile as well. I'm drawn to a lot of animals that are kind of contradictory in many ways. And so even though these bears are these fearsome creatures, they're susceptible to disease and famine and illness and loss as well. And I'm also a fourth generation commercial fisherman. So just like the bears, I rely on the salmon returning every summer in order to survive through the winter time. So I've been feeling a really, really deep connection to bears in recent times, which kind of led to this piece here. But believe it or not, this big bear actually starts with the idea behind a kitten. So during the pandemic, my mother and I were caregivers to a loved one who was terminally ill with cancer. And so we were exceptionally isolated. The world shut down and everyone stayed home, but we had to be extra careful. And it was a really bleak time. It was very sad. And I spent a lot of time on my phone at night scrolling through the social medias and watching a lot of animal videos. And one night the algorithm just popped this up on my Facebook feed, and it was a video of a kitten that had a botfly larva in its cheek. And if you're familiar with botflies, or if you're not familiar with them, they're a larva burrow into a host, and they grow under the skin, and they're absolutely disgusting. And I watched this video as the veterinarian pulled this larva out of this kitten's face, and it was horrific. It left this really big wound. But the vet said that it's going to heal, and the kitten is going to be okay. And everything in life at that time did not feel okay. To kind of see this tiny creature go through this seemingly traumatic event, and to know that at some point it was going to be okay, I really held on to it because so many things felt hopeless in that time. So fast forward a year, I finally got back into a ceramic studio. I didn't make work for over a year during the pandemic, but I was still thinking about that kitten, that disgusting botfly larva. And I started sculpting animals, and I didn't want them to be grotesque, so I didn't do larvae coming out of them, but I started doing blueberries, which is kind of a symbol of family and fertility and tradition and hope. And that kind of transformed into the animals having maybe stone or lichen, and so kind of going more from just one plant to the environment, and started thinking about how the environment shapes us. And then it turned into a bear covered in tundra, and then this piece came along. So I think to kind of really encapsulate what I'm trying to say with this piece, I'm going to read my artist statement about Aftermath. Our environment and our life experiences mold and shape us into creatures that display our wounds and our growth. Whether subtle or overt, these scars and signifiers of progress inform ourselves and others of what we've been through, what we can withstand, and where we can go from here. These scars are trophies of traumas survived and the strength it took to do so. And most importantly, they serve as reminders that among the ashes, there is always hope. I got my ceramics degree at UAA, and one of my mentors, his name is Steve Godfrey, and we were having a meeting one day, and he said, "Lauren, your work is getting really dark." And a lot of all of my work comes from a very sad and lonely place within myself. And he said, "Lauren, you gotta find the hope in your work." And it was probably the most impactful feedback I've ever received from anyone. And so I always try to find these moments of hope. So even though this is a piece in which I could embrace this rage, this anger, to really release that, this bear has been horribly damaged. It's blinded in one eye, there's teeth missing, it's been burned to down to just charcoal and ash. But if you look amongst there's these little fiddlehead ferns, because even after a really destructive fire, even after a lot of damage, something will always grow, something beautiful. And so that is kind of that moment of hope, even though there is so much rage and anger and damage in this piece. And the way I build my work is very cathartic too. I sculpt all of my animals out of clay using the solid build method. So that means I get to slam lots of clay around together. So he was originally built nose up onto a cart, and so he was kind of this triangular shape of clay. So building solid, I'm able to add and take away the clay as much as I want until I get kind of the anatomy starts to come out. And then I go in and I add the details of eyes and ears and nose. And then I let it set up and cut it apart into pieces. So just cutting out his snout, and I hollow all that out because you can't fire a couple 100 pounds of clay. That's basically a bomb. And so he's hollow. And I reassemble all those pieces. I attach all of those sections together, hide the seams, and then I go in and carve all the details, add details like the teeth and the tongue and the ferns. And for this particular piece, I did a lot of underglaze and slip work to kind of add a base to that. And then I put it into a kiln. And I fire it, pull it out again, I add more glaze and surfaces, stains, more underglaze, and then I put it back in the kiln again. And for this particular piece, when it came out, the charred parts were really bright gold. It was a weird thing that happened in the kiln, so I had to fire him a third time. But essentially what is happening is I am taking something that is incredibly malleable and soft, this clay, this mud, and I'm asking a lot of it. I'm putting it through a lot of pressure between the way I'm building with it and drying it and firing it. I'm sending it to almost 2,000 degrees multiple times. It's a lot to ask of a pretty humble material. But at the end of it, I end up with something that is permanent. It is strong and it is firm, and parts of this will last long after I am gone. So with each of these ideas behind my pieces, my hope is that I myself become a more stronger version of myself by working through these ideas. There's kind of a metaphor there of healing and becoming stronger. And the main reason I keep doing this is that a lot of these ideas around these animals, they're human narratives, and they come from, you know, such sad and lonely places within myself, and it feels really isolating. But the thing of it is these are moments that are just a part of the human experience, and it's kind of hard to just walk up to someone and say, this is what I'm going through. It can be kind of overwhelming, right? But if I create these animals that are starting to tell these narratives, these human narratives, you can kind of start being like, oh, this resonates with me. And you start having a conversation with other people, and then you find out your experience is actually quite common. And the only way to really understand that is to have that dialogue with another person. And in that moment of sharing your pain, your experience, it doesn't even it can be a joyful experience too, but in that moment of sharing, there's so much healing and connection. And that's why I keep doing what I'm doing. So at this point, if anyone has any questions, we'll open it up to that. Hi, yes.
Hi. How long did it take you from start to finish?
So I was building another bear head around the same size at the same time. I'd have to go back on my Instagram feed. But roughing this in probably took me about 3 or 4 days, doing 6 to 8 hours days. And then it has to set up. So probably if I had nothing else going on, I could probably do this in 3 to 4 weeks. Part of it is waiting for the clay to set up. Scooping it all out takes a lot of time. And then the carving that I did on the charcoal part, that was a lot of audiobooks. So probably all in all, with everything else I was trying to do going on, this was probably about 1.5 to 2 months from start to finish.
That's actually, I thought it would have taken much longer. So that's actually pretty fast.
Yeah.
Oh, I know, but I was looking at that going, wow, that probably took me forever.
No, I think building solid is very quick. It's very gratifying because you just like slam that clay together really fast. Mm-hmm. Instead of like, if I'm coiling each wall, everything, it takes a lot of time. It's a lot more tedious, and my brain just wants to be able to see things a lot faster. And yeah, when I was making this, I didn't really have a whole lot else happening. I was kind of able, like the studio was my job in many ways. So I go in for 6 to 8 hours, just plug into an audiobook and go. And once I'm like in the zone, time melts away and things come to me. So. Anyone else? Yes.
I don't know anything about ceramics, so that's all glaze that's come out of the kiln. You didn't go back and paint things like the little heads or
The only thing that I did after it had been fired is on the eyes, nose, and in the mouth, I use a gloss because I do not trust clear glaze.
okay.
Some of the clear glaze that I have access to, it can be finicky, it can bubble and cloud. So yeah, all of the color, all of the surface. So the fur, that is a slip and then a glaze on top of that. This is the charred parts of glaze with the black stain over that. The gray fiddlehead ferns, all the color in the mouth, that's all underglaze, which is like a ceramic paint. But yeah, I really tried to use as much ceramic material as I can. I used to just like slap house paint on stuff, and I was challenged to use glaze when I was making this piece.
And when you put the glaze on, is it that color or does it change?
No, it changes a lot.
That's what's so bizarre to me.
Yeah. So that's a great question. So I mixed up this glaze looking at a recipe. A friend of mine had a bunch of test tiles that she let me dig through, and she had all these recipes, and I kind of started picking out these examples of kind of what I was looking for. I wanted kind of a blonde brown bear. Those are kind of the ones that a lot of hunters covet. I don't really understand that, but anyway. And so I mixed up this glaze, but I started adding colorants. So there's a base recipe for a glaze, and then there's these materials called mason stains. They're manufactured colors, and so if you add a little bit of that mason stain into the glaze, it can really change the effect of it. And so I still have a bucket of test tiles where I do it on raw clay. I would add a liquid colored slip to it to see how that would interact with it. So before he was fired the first time, he looked like Winnie the Pooh. He was covered in this bright
Scary.
yellow. He was colored in this bright. Everywhere there's fur, he was covered in this yellow slip, and then fired. And then I mixed up this bucket of glaze and applied it. And when it first came out, it was a lot more yellow than I wanted it to be. And with time, I've accepted it. But yeah, its glaze is kind of chalky and looks nothing like the finished product. So there's a lot of faith. You cross your fingers and pray to killing trust. Yeah, but you do the work first to try and hope that you get a post result. So doing lots of tests and making sure that once you do put that material on something you've spent so much time on, you don't end up wrecking it. Yeah. Thank you. Yes.
What are you working on these days?
What am I working on these days? So I teach at UAA right now, and I also teach at Turnagain. So I don't have a lot of time to make big things. I've been making things, so at UAA we have, at the end of each semester, a student sale. And so I've been trying to make smaller things for that. So Rachel's wearing a pair of my blueberry earrings, thank you. So I make blueberry earrings, salmonberry earrings. I also make smaller taxidermy style animals. They're at a lower price point and size that people can actually fit in their homes. And the last time I made a really big piece was about a year ago. I made a life-size baby moose sleeping. Back in August, I tore my ACL. That's why I'm in a leg brace. So I was out of commission for months. I was literally sitting there teaching, pointing, trying to tell my students what to do, but I really wasn't making much in the way of my own work. So right now I've kind of been more focused on teaching and making smaller pieces and being I'm incredibly independent and being laid up. There's got to be a piece that comes out of this. I'm not far enough from that the point of injury and the frustration of that to make a piece from it. But yeah, it's been kind of a weird experience of not being physically able to do what I normally can do. So it's been humbling and having to work on a smaller scale, and then also just really investing my time in my students. I love teaching. It's incredibly rewarding to see people get involved and fall in love with the material that I've dedicated so much of my life to. So that's kind of more my focus, is teaching and healing. So, anybody else? Okay, thank you.
I'm going to start with, are you ready? Thank you, Museum, for Kendra and Rachel for having me. This is my first artist talk, and I grew up in Anchorage from the time I was 7 and knew about this show and all its iterations. In fact, when I'm standing here today with a piece of the show, it's just like knocking me over. How did that happen? It's so exciting. So thank you. So I'm going to start with this. A bit of yarrow and then of rue, steeplebush and black-eyed Susan, one fringed orchis, ragged and rye, some meadowsweet, the vetch that's blue to make a comeliness for you. With dogbane, daisies bouncing bet, the clover red, the clover white, walking the field before the night, lazy under a lavender sky, crazy and spent from the day of fear. For one of every kind that's here, sundew, burnet, thimbleberry, also simple, also true, like a bit of yarrow and of rue. That's a poem called Bouquet in Dog Time by Hayden Carruth, who's my favorite poet. And I am a poet too. That's what I went to school for, and I published a book and everything. And lately, the writing has gone away, and I've gone more into visual art and textile. And I know a lot of different poems. I love a lot of different poems, but this poem is my favorite, and I've always come back to it. And it's like having a little piece of music in my head or in my pocket. It's a 4-beat line. And the first time I ever read it, I was like, that is the poem my dog would write if she would write me a poem. And it's, it's all at eye level with the flowers, with the dog. And so my piece is about walking my dog on the surface. That's what it's about. And for me, walking a dog in Alaska especially, I walk off leash, so when I can, every chance I can, so don't at me. I know it's controversial, but there's something different about walking a dog on the leash. I've had 3 dogs that were very, very special to me, and I've bonded with them. And I'm a human being standing here with 5 senses, but when I have my dog and we're in the woods, there's 11 senses. So her 5 senses, my 5 senses, I have that. And then together we form this bond of it's our creativity, our curiosity, our wisdom. And it's like that with just about every dog that I've had the 3. One is a puppy, and she's getting there. And she's a pistol. So that's kind of what I'm trying to say in this poem, and in this quilt, and it's one for every kind that's there. And when I start a quilt, I never know really what it's going to look like. I just start sewing. And I'm like, I have this idea. I wonder if I can make shadows, and then okay, that, and then I wonder if I rip it or if I do this, like what's going to happen? What's it going to look like? And so I never know. So this is what it looks like, evidently. And I always say when I'm walking with my dogs that, and they come up, they're talking to you all the time. And they tell you jokes when you're on. And my dogs are always, they're just jokesters. She's a little half border collie, so she's always, and this idea of some meadow sweet, the vetch that's blue to make a comeliness for you. I mean, how many times do your dogs run up and they give you something like, look what I found for you? And you're like, wonderful, focus, yay, So, and I don't want to make light of it because it really is this incredible experience that I get to have, and I rely on it daily, especially now in the days that we're living in and the climate we're living in, the day of fear, praise from the day of fear. I have to get out with my dogs and just walk and remember who we are together walking. And in terms of the construction of the quilt, it's 3 layers. 4 layers, excuse me. So there's a cotton back, some matting, and then I've got shadow in there, and then this stuff on the top is this linen scarf that I bought. How you go in and you impulse buy something. Like, I hate this, I'm never going to wear it, and I had that for 15 years, and then I finally decided, you know what, I'm going to put it on this quilt, because I knew that it would do this kind of ruffly stuff, so a little bit of movement. And I always think of this, this is from a photo that I took of us on our walk. It's our shadows cast, that she was telling me a joke at the time, just, her jokes aren't that great, but she tries. And then I say that it's cotton, hand stitching, there's cotton batting in here, recycled materials. There's also my hair is in here, the dog's hair is in here, because anytime I would have this on my lap, sewing on it. I got to go to the bathroom, so come back. The dog is laying on it, so she's embedded in this thing. And then there's also somewhere, I can't remember where I did it, but I think it's around up here, 4 drops of Oneg blood, because I did finally prick myself and I bled on it. And it just, I think every poster bleeds on weird things. And I have a new puppy now, and I had this piece, and it was already accepted in the show, and it was sitting in my studio, and I thought, nice enough, away. And my new puppy found it, so she did this for me. And I decided to leave it. And Lauren, I love what you said about your piece will last long after you are. Pieces of it will, hopefully. And I always wonder about mine because they're textile, and we don't have a lot of textiles from way before history. And I don't know how long my piece will last, but that's kind of the point of it. And it's meant to decay and go away. And that's kind of what this is it's going away. So, and it's okay. We're here seeing it now. By the time it's gone, maybe there'll be a new generation and somebody else will make the quilt. And then the stitching itself is these lines. When we go on our walks, we just have a set walk that I walk, but then you take detours, and it's just kind of this meditation of where we go, and especially when we're on trails in the woods that loop back and forth, and you can take the same way twice. And it became a very meditative practice. I didn't know that I was going to stitch it this much, but once I got going, I was like, oh, I think it's done. I'm like, no, it's not, because I just loved holding it, I loved stitching it, and the second I would touch it, just like, I can touch my board, right? So I would touch it, and time just, whoo, stops, and I'm just there with it, doing it. I took it on a couple trips with me, and do it at night on some trips I was on. And then watching baseball, I love to watch baseball, and you don't really have to watch baseball, you can do other stuff, so that's where I do a lot of my stitching. And I wanted to show you too, just flip it up. So I also do these hand signatures here. So it's the day where I did it, what it is. And I think I said on here, this one's for, she was telling me a joke, and it's for the otter dog. That's who that is, it's otter. So, it's very important to me now. I'm quilting all the time, and I started quilting about 20 years ago. I graduated with an MFA, and I remember the day I graduated, I walked out of the building where they sign off on you. And I walked out of the building, and I thought, what am I going to do now? Of course I'm going to write, but I went right to the quilt store and bought a sewing machine, and I walked in, and I just had this urge for green. That's it. It was sublingual. It was just like, I need green. And I realized that I had been giving so much time to writing and reading that the visual part of my brain had just, like, the art part or coloring part of it had turned off. So I was like, I need to reignite that. And once I did, the quilting just exploded. I was so excited about it. And so, but anyway, so for 20 years I've been buying all this quilter's cotton, which I love quilter's cotton and all the patterns, so it's terrific. But now this is quilter's cotton stuff on the inside. Now I'm working with a lot of recycled materials and old shirts. And my in-laws have both passed away, so I have their old stuff. And I have my mother-in-law's stuff from the 1950s. Using it, it's just terrific. You open a box and like, what is in here? I don't even know. So I love doing that. And once I've recycled it and it's torn, whatever, then I don't care. I just start stitching, and that's when my best work comes, because I don't know that I paid $8 a yard for that. This is just something that I got. So I think it's free when you don't have that sense of it's bought. It's recycled, thrifted. Any questions?
So you started in poetry.
Yeah.
Do you find any similarities? Like, do you find that the way you might start a poem influences how you might begin a piece in quilting?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Well, this poem has always stayed with me. And I just did another piece, that poem by Whitman. I think it's just called America Center for Equal Sons, Equal Daughters, Equal Sons. Something perennial with the earth. It's just a very short little poem. And I was thinking about that, and what I was working on just became that. And it's becoming it visually, not linguistically, which is what artists have been doing always, for centuries. And I'm just now catching on. It has that meaning. And a lot of my quotes now, they do have a narrative to them, or characters. And I'll build a lot of characters in my quotes. I'm working on one right now that I call it Frogs in a Wheelbarrow, and it's my group of friends who call ourselves Frogs in a Wheelbarrow. And so it's just these big color selections of what each friend reminds me of. And it's very abstract, and it's going a million different directions, because that's why we're frogs in wheelbarrows. We can't ever get together to gather ourselves.
Well, I know you as a playwright,
Yeah, and I played.
so I think that's really interesting that I guess you could call it writing out. We've sort of talked about it, but do you think you'll go back to writing again? And
I do still write poetry. I think since COVID. So, you know how when COVID came, everybody was like, hey, I'm learning Danish, I'm making sourdough bread, you know. Where I worked, it was our family meat shop here in town. We were overnight, we quadrupled our business, but we did not up our staff. So for 3 years, that's the pace that I was working at. And it was so stressful, and then with all of COVID, and I got COVID a couple times, I feel like it changed my brain chemistry, and I'm trying to get back to it. It's not quiet enough for the poems now. So I'm trying to get back to that. And so then when I'm in my studio, I just did a piece called The Hermit. You know, I'm a hermit, and I love to be in there just because these are worlds that I'm creating. And I love it. Which the same as writing a play. It's like creating this world.
Right.
But I don't have to run it past a director or an artistic director, you know, it's just me, and I don't have actors getting up there taking their own interpretations, so, which I love actors and that process. There's another question.
Do you hand stitch all of your quilts, or do you do a mix?
A mix, yeah. At first I did all machine quilting, and I did it on my domestic machine, and then now I've bought a long arm, which I like, but there's such a learning curve on a long arm. Are you familiar with
No, I mean, I've seen it, but
yeah, it's
very
a
much
big,
procedures.
the frame is like this, so your quilt is laid out on it, and the sewing machine is a thing you move, and you can sew and do all this, but I'm sewing it, so I'm much better on my domestics. So then I go back to hand stitching, and a piece like this, and my art pieces, I mostly hand stitch. I just enjoy it.
Do you sketch out a lot of quilt ideas in the sketchbook first, or is it more free-flowing than that?
It's all improvisational. But I do draw quilts and things, and I'll never make those because I draw them. So
Okay, they're already done.
Yeah, I don't need to
Okay,
do them.
yeah.
So, yeah.
Is it like, do you know the size though? Is it like choosing a canvas and you can work within that space, or does it grow as you?
Most of them grow, to my chagrin, because they get so big. This one I kept small because I knew I wanted to travel with it, and it's the width of the material. So selvage to selvage on that back material. So that one I kept, and if I know I want to keep it a certain size, I'll put up strings on my design wall. I always go outside of it though, but it gives me a guidance. And it's kind of like, and that question of is it like poetry? If I put up things to keep it a certain size, it's like the form of poetry, like it's a sonnet. So then people are like, oh, I hate that, it's a restriction, but when you compress it, there's a tension in there that gives it a life. So that's what I like having that sometimes. And I always think of quilting too, I think what really attracts me to it is, or textile art is, you know, like the early women who were doing it, it was little pieces that they were sewing back together. So the world is sort of chaos. There's all these little pieces of fabric. I cut it up and it's just, you should see my studio. But I start to sew it back together and it starts to come back into order. And so it's that moment of chaos meeting order, that tension that just fascinates me. And like how chaotic can it get, how boring can it get, you know, that you want it right there where it's not. I don't do a lot of pattern quilts at all. It's all
I'm going to step over here so I'm not shouting into the microphone. In Mary's intro text, she says, this is more of a comment than a question, she says that the landscape looms large in most of the pieces that are in the exhibition. I love with Lauren's, you see like an animal that's from the landscape. With Gretchen, it's going to be a very abstracted landscape. And hearing it was based on a photograph of a shadow that's on the ground, and then you have your trail throughout it. It's just another unexpected form of a landscape.
Yeah.
But I think initially people wouldn't see that, so it's why it's lovely to hear you talk about it and
Yeah.
understand it in that way.
I was wondering when it was, well, you know, I put it together and I basted it all together and there was no stitching on it. And I was like, what am I going to do with it? And that's when I was like, well, we go on this walk, and I think I did the first, like, a walk that kind of was sort of like, oh, we're going to go down and then we go up around the pond, and, you know, and then from there I just did my own free-form walks. Yeah, definitely landscape. But it was strange to hear when she was talking about it. I was like, yeah, there is landscape in there, because I wasn't thinking that at all when she said that. was glad that she could spark on that.
Well, thank you so much.
This is mine, and it's kind of interesting to see it up in a museum wall instead of in storage in my garage or on a wall just tossed somewhere. I'll start with cultural background. So my mother's group are Germans from Russia and North Dakota who fled as immigrant refugees from what is nowadays Ukraine. They fled from the Russian Civil War and the Holodomor genocide, only to arrive in North Dakota and ending up benefiting from the genocide against the indigenous people, in their case specifically the Lakota Dakota of the Spirit Lake Nation. And that just really created this complex relationship with genocide. I bring that up because of all the things that are happening in the world right now. I think it's important for us all to take a moment and just realize what our history is, even personally, what's taught and what's not taught. So I grew up in Anchorage. My parents loaded us up. I was a newborn. They traveled up the Alcan when it was a dirt path. I think they were nuts to take a newborn up the Alcan when it was a dirt path, but here we are. In 2019, I got a Rasmussen Individual Artist Award to write about my experience growing up in South Central Alaska in the 80s, 90s, and beyond. I think I'm still doing a lot of growing at this point. This is one of those pieces, kind of, in that that was 2019. So what happened right after? Well, the pandemic happened right after, and it was supposed to, I had all these pieces and they were supposed to go on a tour for different galleries, and instead my family and I were drowning in them. They were in my house, and any piece that for me sticks around, I don't stop working on it. I keep going. This was, and having the Individual Artist Award was the first time that I actually had money specifically set aside for artwork. Up until that point, I was raised in a household that I gotta love the Deutsche Ausstellungsstelle, but they are not artistic people. My mom was so confused about my art tendencies. I would create things out of duct tape, bits of tools, or whatever we had around is what I usually created art. So having the Rasmussen Award meant I could go buy a canvas and paint. Like this was amazing. It was an amazing opportunity. But since I had all that around, I did continue to work on a lot of them, change them. Then in 2022, I got COVID that turned into long COVID. I also at that time had a 1-year-old. Long COVID completely destroyed my life. Everything I was planning, just the absolute deep exhaustion. Everything from like I was planning on starting up an apple orchard for retirement purposes down the road, and just everything. I'm speechless with how much it affected my life and everything in it, just from my ability to be a mom, my ability to work, everything. I'm happy to say that since October, it just kind of got better, which I guess a lot of long COVID sufferers are saying there's just a point where it just starts to get better. So if you are suffering from long COVID, maybe there's a point waiting for you that it'll start to get better. But with long COVID, I really struggled with everything creative, and that really tore at my insides. And what I started doing, this is one of the pieces, I started reworking and repainting what I had already done. So you'll see on here that it's got a 2019 date and it's got a 2024 date, because when I still constantly work on things if they're around. And two, I use these as kind of a crutch to get myself through those times, and to rework them, to keep working on them. It was a little bit easier than starting with a blank canvas. So each of these pieces that I did came with a creative nonfiction micro story. It's a long-winded way of saying a memory. So my process for that is to really put myself back into that memory and write about it, and then create an image around that memory. So I guess I will read what the written work is that goes with this piece, which is called Winter Light. The dark. All there was in that moment was lack. She slid her foot forward along the compact snow. She should be on the road. She guessed that if she strayed too far, she would encounter piles of plowed snow along the sides. It was a comfort to know the sharp, icy barriers would keep her on target and not let her stray. She just needed to keep going. This darkness defined the world in a way she had never experienced above ground, especially in the open air. Even behind closed eyelids, there was more to see. There was nothing in this void, no matter how wide she opened her eyes. When she had gone to the main cabin, it had been light. She hadn't thought about how she would be there, how long she would be there. That dark would come for her after the sun slunk away. Walking away from the bright aftermath of fires and companionship, she hadn't worried about the forgotten flashlight. Many times she had walked between winter cabins across frozen snowy landscapes that twinkled in the luminescence of the moon and stars. The cabin wasn't far. She had faith she would be just fine. She tried to hold on to that faith now. Blinking slowly, she tried to find out if there was any difference in having her eyes open or closed. Her sisters were blind, and she thought about the ultimate sightlessness, slowly catching up to them and taking them over. She shuddered in her winter gear, forcefully turning her mind from her repeated nightmare of following her sisters into sudden, permanent deprivation. Then she rallied. No, she told herself firmly. Don't think of that. Think positive. Her words were swallowed into the ink. Her sisters could navigate without vision, and so would she. One foot slid forward, then another, ears stretched for any sound. She put her hands up, then quickly dropped them again, self-conscious. What if somebody saw her acting this way? Her dry laugh got tangled in the wind and disappeared in the hollow of murk around her. No one could see anything out here. She put her hands out again. Her eyes scanned the charcoal smudge before her, twitching to take in all directions, seeking any point of light. But there was nothing, total nothingness to see. All black, adrift within the night. Feeling vulnerable, she felt her pulse outrace itself. What if I walked directly into a moose? What could I do? What if there were creatures watching her, seeing better with their adapted eyes? Keep walking, her spirit whispered. Keep going. Keep going. Her eyes were starved for light. They hurt from lack of spark. Keep going. She breathed in, taking the air through her nose, shifting the smells. She attempted to guess if an animal's scent was on the crisp wind or if a creature may be nearby. Keep going. With no friendly pricks of star to help guide her, loneliness crept in beneath her layers, finding the chinks and cracks in her puffed armor. Dark consumed all the waves and particles of her life. Her fingers out, reaching, she was sure that they would encounter an animal's warm fur with each of her sliding shuffles forward. If not some live danger, then a hardened snowbank. Wondering how she had managed to stay on the road this long already without ramming into jagged side, she continued to make progress forward into her fears. She felt herself begin to dissolve into the absence of brilliance, into the dullness of no one. It was taking her. She would soon be a shadow blown through with harsh winds. Keep going. There, the edge of the piercing snowbank. Yes. Her body called itself back, reassembled and alert. Yet something else existed again, and now she could as well. Tapping her boot toe against the bank, she continued slowly, hands still out. Her toe hit wood, the start of steps. She tried to accept the impossibility of finding the steps without ocular guidance as a mystery she had no time for. She'd figure it out later how this deprived archer had found her mark. Up one step, shuffle forward. Was it worth it to crawl? She was so afraid of falling down the steep slope that her vision remembered, its danger haunting her. She was so close to her destination. Keep going. There, her boot toe crackled snow again. There were no more stairs. Making a 90-degree turn, she hoped it was the correct direction. She was almost there. Keep going. Shuffle and reach. By daylight, she knew that there was a cliff's edge, but she couldn't think of that now. Keep going. Fingers connected against the wood plank. The door. Flinging herself against the barrier, she found the handle, turned it, and opened it. Slowly her boots sounded against the rough floorboards. Different from the crepitating packed snow, the shuffling thud accompanied her to the table, and she remembered seeing under the window. Keep going. The match struck like fireworks. The bright impaled her, then softened. The light swung onto the lamp, catching, picking up, and burning brighter. Her eyes adjusted to the glow as she delicately pulled back the curtains and placed the guiding light where her fellows could see. Keep going. That is the story. I will say that cabin was located on the indigenous lands of the Ahtna Athabascan people of past Sutton. Any questions?
I love this piece. It's one of my favorites. I've come to the exhibit a few times with my mom and stuff. And my mom and I would stand here. She's got eye problems now. And then we walk very close, and I'm supposed to get very close to your painting. There's so much to see in it. It looks very simple painting, but it's not. There's so many layers. It's just gorgeous. But I have a question. When you get to it, there's no black in the painting.
So painting a memory, and this was when, darn it, I forgot any sort of light at the main cabin when I was walking to the cabin that was a little further away that I was staying at. And it was, I don't know how it was so dark out there that night. Usually there's light on the snow, there's, something that you can kind of make your way. And still, when you close your eyes, it's like, it was more dark with the eyes open than it was with your eyes closed. So this is actually my eyes closed, and then my brain trying to put in what it had seen earlier in the day, which is kind of
She said that.
Do you write a story for every memory or something, a narrative for every one of your paintings?
Not everyone. Generally, any work of art that I have has a story that goes along with it, but I don't always write them down. Yeah. It was a nice feature of doing this project and having that award was to actually take the time to do that, to write the pieces, the memories that go with each of the paintings. As a mom, being an artist is kind of a selfish thing, and being a mom, sometimes you don't have the luxury of taking the time to put towards creative pursuits. And it was just very important to step back and be like, no, I will take time to do creative pursuits. I will do this because it gives me more of a sense of who I am, and it ultimately makes me a better mom by being able to show my kids how to be true to themselves, their example. Which my 3-year-old is not here today because he would have been a little bit too much of an example.
Can you explain the gold leaf in the border? painting?
Yeah, so that was actually the last thing that I added to the painting. I was staring at it over those pandemic years and working on it, and it just, something had been continuously missing in it, and no matter how many times I added to it, I couldn't figure out what was missing. And what it was missing was the candlelight. So the candlelight in the story at the end, putting that up in the window, you can't see it necessarily straight on, but you get a little bit of the candlelight around the edge.
Any other questions?
Thank you, Gretchen.